The guy who started this conspiracy, this lie, his name is Andrew Wakefield, a British surgeon.
I'm a physician. I qualified in 1981. I went on to practice as a surgeon with a specific interest in inflammatory bowel disease. I then became an academic, running a team of 19 people researching inflammatory bowel disease, and published over the period of 10 years in the order of 130, 140 scientific publications on that particular subject.
And the truth of the matter is that he was creating a competing vaccine. He had a patent for his own vaccine, see? So he had a motivation to put this lie out.
One of the allegations against me by Brian Deere is that all of this was set up. The whole thing was a scam intended to discredit the MMR vaccine and bring my own single vaccine onto the market in competition, and thereby bring down the pharmaceutical companies. And it's a wonderful scam. It's kind of Dr. Evil sitting in his mountain lair. How does he think anyone could ever consider they could get away with such nonsense? What we wanted a way of treating these children because we felt they probably had a persistent measles infection in their intestine that was driving this disease process. At least that was our thinking at the time. And we needed a way to boost the immune system to get rid of the virus. There was a compound on the market, it's called transfer factor. It seems to boost the immunity to specific viruses and allows the body to get rid of them itself. And I filed a patent on this on behalf of the medical school. It wasn't my patent. They owned it. They stood to profit from it. One of the things included in that was the possibility that it might be used as a vaccine.
He's right then. In June 1997, you thought that the MMR caused problems, and you filed for a safer single measles vaccine.
In essence, yes, but it leads us to infer, what he leads his reader to infer from that is that it was a competitor to MMR. No, it wasn't. It could never have been because it didn't produce the right kind of immunity. And moreover, throughout this, I was recommending that parents use the single live measles vaccine. So why would I do that? If I was trying to produce an alternative to go onto the market to take it over, I would be competing against myself. So that doesn't make any sense at all.
I made a recommendation that parents should opt for the use of the single vaccines. In other words, not protect their children against these infections, but they should have the option of how to do it. And at that time, in the UK and the US, the single vaccines were available. So the parents could choose. I'm not happy about MMR, but I want to vaccinate my child, so I will opt for the single vaccines. 6 months later, the government withdrew the importation license for the single vaccines. In the US, some years later, Merck unilaterally stopped the production of the single vaccines. I mean, they make them individually to put them together, but they stopped making them available in the marketplace, so that it was MMR or nothing, our way or the highway. I asked a senior member of the Department of Health, why would you do that? As you said, because if we allow parents the choice, then it will destroy our MMR program. In other words, the concern was for the protection of the program and not the children.
Not only that, but lawyers were suing the drug companies and making money for themselves.
Damn lawyers.
So all of this has... Right.
In the UK, there was then litigation against the manufacturers of the drug, and I became involved in that litigation. And patients within the Lancet study also became involved. Once they got their diagnosis and they were convinced that this is what happened, then they joined the litigation. It was alleged that the study was done for the purpose of litigation, that it was funded by lawyers for litigation. That is absolutely untrue. It simply was not. So I agreed to be a medical expert, and I feel obliged to act as a medical expert on their behalf, because there were any number of doctors lining up on the other side to be paid as experts to act on behalf of the pharmaceutical industry. In fact, I was being paid for by a government-funded compensation program to act as a medical expert. It had nothing whatsoever to do with the Lancet study, which was paid for by the National Health Service. The payment from the Legal Aid Board was not to me initially, it was to the medical school to conduct a study to look for evidence of measles virus in the diseased intestine of these children. That is what it specifically did. This was known to the editor of the Lancet nearly a year before the paper was published. He was sent documents from the lawyer saying, we are working with Dr. Andy Wakefield on this issue. He knew or should have known, but conveniently he forgot that fact when it came to testify before the General Medical Council under oath. And it was only subsequently that it was disclosed that he knew all along.
I think ultimately this ends up being devastating to this entire story because this whole thing crumbles right here. Mr. Deere's article makes me appear irrational for continuing to believe that the MMR caused difficulties which predated its administration. While the inaccuracies in the royal free discharge summary may be chalked up to sloppy record keeping, if my son really is patient 11, then the Lancet article is simply an outright fabrication. But what he's referring to is the fact that Brian Deere says you fabricated this to say that his autistic symptoms began 1 week after the MMR vaccine, which you're saying you did not say that.
No, absolutely. The paper did not say that. It talked about the first behavioral symptom, not the first symptom of autism.
I want to look at the Lancet paper very quickly. And here is what Brian Deere must be referring to. Patient 11, behavioral diagnosis is autism, right? Exposure identified vaccination with MMR, which the father did say and continued to say that he was under that impression that the MMR started the issues. Now, as you pointed out, it says 1 week. 1 week from what? Brian Deere is saying that you were claiming 1 week the autism behavioral diagnosis. But actually, if you look at the heading, it is what you said. This is what you said, right? Interval from exposure to first behavioral symptom, 1 week. What were the features associated with the exposure? What was beginning 1 week? Current viral pneumonia for 8 weeks following MMR. You do not say here autism. Correct?
Correct.
Deere is trying to claim you took a previous diagnosis before the MMR, moved it after to suit your claim. The cornerstone of the argument of fraud against you is a manipulation of the truth. But I think this line is interesting. As reflected in my initial correspondence to the Royal Free requesting my son be included in the research study. This father is not saying I was contacted by a law group that offered for me to be a part of a legal settlement. Right there, he is saying, I requested that my child be a part of this study that I heard about. To me, beyond the fact that the fraud is wrong, this goes all the way back to the statement that the lawyers were choosing the children to be a part of your study. This man clearly was not chosen by a lawyer. So this letter, I think, ultimately destroys almost any credibility that Brian Deere has on any of his statements. We've just shown that the real fraud is the manipulation of the story of Child 11 by Brian Deere. These are all factual articles. But what I think is fascinating is there was a journalist named John Stone, and he reached out to BMJ and said, you need to have come clean on the fact that you are funded by Merck and GlaxoSmithKline that both make an MMR vaccine. You didn't do that when you published this article. And you would think they wouldn't say anything, but we found that they actually responded to that, and I want to read that here. This is from the British Medical Journal. This is response to John Stone from the head of the British Medical Journal herself. Fiona Godley writes this: we should have declared the BMJ Group's income from Merck as a competing interest to the editorial and the 2 Editor's Choice articles that accompanied Brian Deere's series on the secrets of the MMR scare. We should also, as you say, have declared the group's income from GSK as a competing interest in relation to these articles. We will publish clarifications. Andy, they accused you of fraud of manipulating Child 11's data and write an entire article being funded by the very makers of the MMR vaccine, which is the central point of your investigation for multiple years.
It is a lie from start to finish, but here's the problem, Del. I'm me, and they're the British Medical Journal, and they're in bed with GlaxoSmithKline and Merck. They're in bed with the government. They want a single common outcome, and that is to crush this paper and get rid of me and let me serve as an example to other doctors. And therefore the outcome is predetermined. There's never going to be any recourse to justice in this. I mean, that's just the way the world is. It's not going to stop me doing the work on behalf of these children. That's why I'm still here 20 years later. I'm not going to quit. Why? Because we're winning. We're winning because the truth is coming out. It's coming out because of Vaxxed and what you do, and a lot of people around the world telling the truth and deciding enough is enough. So this is not the time to walk away or be concerned. We are going to win. And a measure of how much we're winning and how well we're winning is how angry they are and how they're forced to pass laws to mandate vaccination here in California in order to ram their belief systems and their profiteering down the throats of parents, because they can't persuade them through the process of confidence based on the science that what they're saying is true. It's a lie.